of the 12 games we have, beyond getting USC at home, Iowa at home, Michigan at home, I think an improved, scrappy, better Michigan State team at home, Cincinnati, essentially a home game with our game one struggles and game one, haven't beaten a power 4 team in game one since 2003. That blew me away the other day. Now, you made the point, we don't always schedule power 4 teams in game one scenarios, but we have in the past decade, way more often than not. With all that being said, we basically get home games or home game type atmospheres for all those games. It's really at Penn State. And I'm not saying at UCLA is going to be easy or at Minnesota is going to be easy. Even go halfway across the country to at Maryland is no gimme. Don't expect Maryland to be great, but you never know what's going to happen. Especially, that'll be our first road game of the year. Maybe remember Purdue at 11 a.m. last year? How way more interesting that game was for about 2.5 quarters?
Yeah.
If it's an early start, halfway across the country, first road game, you never know. Okay, so I don't take anything for granted. But I look at this schedule. There's one game, and I think you said it on Monday. There's one game we're going to be a heavy underdog. And who's to say we can't beat Penn State? Look at what almost happened in the Ohio State game last year. A couple calls go differently. Big Ten refs. Maybe we'll talk about that game differently. But there's 11 games where we absolutely could be within a touchdown one way or the other, being the favorite of the dog. Conversely, there's only 2 games where we will be an absolute double-digit favorite, and that's Akron and Houston Christian. There are 10 games where we could we're going to be favored versus Cincinnati. But the other 9 games, and Cincinnati's not a gimme, there's 10 games where it could go either way with a touchdown one way or the other. Anywhere from 11-1 to 2-10. If you look at this, there's no gimmies really either way other than we should beat Akron and Houston Christian. I feel like that's very fair to say. It should not be relatively close. I think that's one of the things that makes college football so intriguing and the parity across the board. And it used to be, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama really had a shot at winning a national title. All of a sudden last year, the 8 seed wins the national title. And the 7 seed Notre Dame played them for the national title. And so all of a sudden there's more parity and more teams that have chances to win conference titles and national titles than there's ever been. That's the good thing about the transfer portal and NIL era. There is a good thing. It's created more parity. Oh, I'm sitting behind an All-American at Bama. Boom. Maybe I'll head on over to wherever you want to go. You said Kansas State. Maybe it's Michigan State. Maybe it's Michigan. I don't know. It's created more parity instead of these stacked rosters that we've seen in the past, whether it be Ohio State or LSU 2019 or Ohio State last year or Alabama 2020. Some of these absolute stacked rosters has created more parity. You look at the schedule, yeah. I mean, we just kind of we should be, Michigan State, Northwestern. We don't truly know. At the same time, we're going to be a big dog to Penn State. We could just as easily win that game. With this schedule, it's not crazy difficult as we look at it. You never know how games are actually going to unfold. But that's one of the things I like the most is it's also so freaking unpredictable. And I look at that month of November. I've said it before and I'll say it again. USC, UCLA, Penn State, Iowa, some big brands, some rivalries in there, some intriguing matchups. Even UCLA with Nico Iamaleava versus Dylan Raiola out at Pasadena. That's going to be a highly entertaining month in November. What are your thoughts on any of that stuff that I just mentioned? Is there anything off the text line that we've chatted about so far there, Jake?
Yeah, I could look through the text line here, but I especially trying to think through the schedule too, and saying all these games are, Nebraska's not going to be that big of a dog or will be the favorite. That's where, kind of the uncomfortability for me starts of, okay, so what are we talking about? One possession games. And what has Nebraska specifically struggled with for the longest time now is one possession game. So, I mean, there are all of these, and you talked about it before too, with, kind of getting Wisconsin out of the way, getting to a bowl game. There's all these barriers that hover over the Nebraska football program that it's nice to kind of pick away at them like Nebraska did last year, but it doesn't have to happen like that, where we just take one step forward every year. It can all happen at once, and Nebraska can start to swing and start to win some of these one possession games, and they don't have to get a whole lot better. That's got to kind of look at USC last year. People think, oh, yeah, Lincoln Riley, USC, hot seat. They're all, this, that, and the other thing. They were 1-5 in one possession games. If they could have went 500, if they could have turned that around, they would have been in the playoffs. If they could have went 500, we'd be thinking about them differently. So that's, again, going to be a huge barrier for Nebraska to try to get through. But, maybe it can all happen at once with this team.
So it's interesting because one-score games are going to come up here in about a minute. Let's put a button on the returning production. I have all these numbers. From 81% of passing yards returning, 84.3% of rushing yards returning, 71.5% of receiving yards returning. The offensive line at 19 combined return starts, whether it's for Baylor, Temple, and Nebraska coming up. I can dive into these a little bit more. Just know that Baylor and Temple had way more returning production. Nebraska also has way more transfer players that they're counting on. So again, to me, it skews the numbers a little bit. Like there's way more returning direct production that they had at Baylor and at Temple. A lot of it's like 80%, 90%. The linebackers had 97% of their returning production going into year 3, okay, at Baylor when Matt Rhule was there versus what we've got this year is obviously not the same, but you bring in Marquez Watson-Trent, who is also the number 2 graded linebacker that's returning for any college football team in the entire country. But because he wasn't here a year ago, he doesn't count towards our returning production, but we're counting on him. He's got a ton of experience, and he's a guy that we're counting on playing for us. So I have all those numbers. I might spare us because I don't think it's 100% equatable across the board just because they didn't have the transfer portal back then like it is now, and we're counting on new faces just like they were counting on returning production back then. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next thing here. And is this the... Ooh, because I know the one-score games are coming up soon. Let me see here. All right, the next thing I've got. What are some of the similarities between Temple, Baylor, and Nebraska? So when you look at it, is the one-score games. I knew this was coming up. So Nebraska, Matt Rhule or not, 17 of 46 in one-score games since 2014. That the bowl game of that year.
17 and 46. Ugh.
Can I be honest with you? I didn't know we'd won 17 of those. I'm not even trying to make a joke.
Yeah.
That number, I didn't realize it was 46 in the loss column, but I didn't realize there was also 17. But you're going back 2014 in the win column as well. So, yeah, that's obviously not what we're looking for. But you kind of compare some apples to apples here, all right, with the 2-10 team that Matt Rhule had at Temple. I believe that was 2013. They were 0-5 in games decided by one score or less. This has been something that predates Matt Rhule here at Nebraska. It's also something that predates with Matt Rhule prior to Nebraska when you look at his teams at Temple and Baylor. All right. Let's see. In the first 11 games of 2013, they were 0-3 in one-score games. They did get a 10-3 win over Tulane in the final game of the regular season. They didn't end up going to a bowl game that year, but they were 6-6. They were 500 in year 2. All right, 2017 with the Baylor Bears, they finished 1-11 overall and went 0-4 in games decided by 8 points or less. So again, one-score games, not phenomenal, whether it's Baylor, Temple, etc. All right, the 2018 Baylor Bears finished 3-2 in one-score games. All right, along the way, Baylor was 6-6 in the regular season, won their bowl game, finished 7-6. So kind of similar to Nebraska's year 2 the season ago as well. So through 2 years, Temple was 1-8 in one-score games. Baylor was 3-6. All right. I believe Nebraska was 2-5 a year ago in one-score games. Year 3, Temple was 2-1, and Baylor was 5-2 in those same one-score games. So you could say, oh, there's struggles in one-score games, or you could say it's young players, they're developing, they're growing, they're getting better. Bam, all of a sudden year 3 rolls around, they've got that experience, they have developed, and now between Baylor and Temple, year 3 one-score game records, Matt Rhule was 7-3 versus some of the other records in one-score games that I mentioned the first 2 years. So is that one-score game struggles? Well, yeah, you can't just dismiss it. I also think it's the struggles of building a program as well. I've said before, yes, we can bring up the record versus ranked teams as well, whether it's Nebraska in the past decade or whether it's Matt Rhule. I'm curious, since the day he got hired, I have been consistent. Is Matt Rhule a good football coach? Will he be a good football coach at Nebraska? Yes, I believe so. I mean, nobody can say definitively for sure, but I am as definitive as I can be without saying I'm 100% sure. I believe he's the guy to get us back to 8-9 wins. I don't know beyond that because he's never stayed anywhere long enough to see what he can do once he builds a program up. Once he builds a program up, you could argue he always got a promotion. He went from Temple got promoted to Baylor, got promoted to the Panthers, etc. So he gets us to 8, 9, 10 wins. He's told me consistently he doesn't want to go anywhere else. It'll be the first opportunity and chance we have to see what Matt Rhule can do if and when he builds Nebraska into an 8, 9 consistent and or 10-win team. Then what does his record versus ranked teams look like? Then what does his overall record look like? Right now, he has a losing record at Nebraska overall and in the Big Ten. What does it look like, though, once he's got a program built up? What's the one-score game record look like? All of a sudden, his record in one-score games in year 3 at Temple and Baylor, 7-3, is dramatically different than 1-2. So I like numbers because they're irrefutable. They aren't based on people's opinions, egos, emotions. You've also got to know context, and you've got to see the full picture, and you got to understand everything that goes in behind them because, yeah, the win-loss record in one-score games as an overall whole isn't great for Matt Rhule or his record versus ranked teams. Now, he's got to get Nebraska to winning 8, 9, 10 games. Then stay, and then let's see what happens, because that's when we learn whether Matt Rhule's a good football coach or a great football coach. Because right now, we haven't had a chance to learn beyond the good football coach part. Does that make sense to you, Jake?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was, I think everybody's waiting to see of that for Matt Rhule when he has that program built up, because yeah, the records aren't great against the top 25 opponents, but like you said, that's fighting from underneath. You look at, and we did this with Terrell the other day, where he's kind of rattling off all these coaches and their records against top 25 opponents. Well, of course, Ryan Day's pretty good at it. I mean, he's got Ohio State, right? Yep. And then you kind of go through some of the other names that that are kind of fighting up, and that's what Matt Rhule is doing. Is generally you're not favored in these top 25 games. We don't really get that stat with the top 25, and by the end, like you said, they didn't quite get across the line against Oklahoma at Baylor, which was as close to anything as you could say as having a program built up that we've seen under Matt Rhule, but they were right there with them. So, I can't wait to see what it looks like. Like you said, when it's built up, hopefully this is the year they can take that jump. And we can kind of get an opportunity, because it's not just Nebraska fans that are wondering. Everybody's wondering about Matt Rhule across the nation of what the ceiling is for him. We know there's potential. What's the ceiling?
I think you do make a good point, because I think Nebraska is intriguing to people across the country. I pointed this out before. The instant we beat Colorado, when it was 28-10 at the end of the game, all of a sudden there was a bunch of national attention on Nebraska. And then the Indiana game happens and it all disappears. People can poke fun at Nebraska all they want. And they can say, you're living in the past, you're living in this. The instant Nebraska looked like they were going to be decent a year ago, everybody hopped on. People want blue bloods to be good. To my surprise, most national people still consider Nebraska to be a blue blood. I do. I just didn't know if national people would. And they do. When they list the 8 blue bloods, Nebraska's in there. I've never seen a list without them yet. Okay. People want Nebraska to be good. It's easy to poke fun right now. The instant Nebraska is good, people are going to hop on. Admittedly, part of that is people know Nebraska fans are passionate and they want people to see what they're talking about, and they know Nebraska fans will tune in. But also, I've sat here and said, college football is better when, obviously, Alabama's good, but the Alabamas and the Notre Dames and the Ohio States and the USCs, even Miami and Florida State and all those schools, Tennessee. I like that Tennessee's back and doing good again. I miss the Philip Fulmer days. So I am glad that Josh Heupel has them as a college football playoff team. Obviously, the game didn't go great, but they were in the playoffs. They were a top 10 team. And so for me, I like it when those teams are good. And people, whether they want to admit it or not, they know college football is better when Nebraska is good. You look specifically at these one-score games. All right, we'll look at Temple. Year 1, Matt Rhule's 0-5. Year 2, 1-3. Year 3, 2-1. An overall record of one-score games, 3-9. But again, it got better and better, and then in year 3, it was completely different. Baylor, year 1, 0-4. Year 2, 3-2. Year 3, 5-2. 8-12 overall, 8-12 overall, but the last 2 years, he actually had a winning record overall, 7-6 and 11-1 in the regular season in his last year. Also, 3-2 and 5-2 in one-score games in those same respective seasons. Now, Nebraska so far, 1-5 in one-score games, year 1, 2-5 in year 2. So I guess you can say technically better, year 3. We're 3-10 in one-score games under Matt Rhule so far the first 2 years. But what happens in year 3? Let me ask you this question. Well, 2 questions. Is there anything off the text line? Number 2, does Nebraska have a winning record in one-score games this season, Jake?
Well, I think it's interesting. We can go through the text line in a second. I think it's also, I think that they, I mean, man, that's a big question. But
I know.
not all the other, because we're talking too, we've talked so much about these one score games and the favorites, Nebraska, Matt Rhule fighting up, not always being the favorites. The two wins they did get last year that were one possession games were Rutgers and Boston College. And you could argue neither of them should have been one possession games.
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska should have won by more. So sometimes it's not even, those numbers that you do get are kind of working on your behalf or somewhat of disappointing weeks to begin. I don't want to say disappointing.
Misleading,
but yeah. So it's just kind of interesting the way we look at that. It's tough to say. I mean, with the last 10 years, or what did you say, since 2014, it's been longer than that, of these one score, it's hard to predict Nebraska winning or having a winning record in one possession games. I'll do it because I'm drinking the Kool-Aid and feel like this is the year that they have a lot of potential. I'm starting to buy more into it, but I've been burnt before, so we'll say that I wouldn't bet the house on it. But we do have some response off the text line. His Cubster says, so what I'm hearing is we're going to get at least 10 one-score games this year. So he's thinking about that. Gus Mohawk says there are 3 former head coaches on the staff. That's something Rhule didn't have at Baylor or Temple. I think Eckler or special teams is the cherry on top. This team can be dangerous, especially if Dylan lives up to the hype. And Bill and Bennett throws in, I don't want to hear Red Kingdom song either at Arrowhead, but I think they're probably going to do that, Bill. I'm sorry. And IQ Crew says, if Compton finds a way to bang the drums, then start the war chant. But it's Travis Kelce's house, so I don't see that helping.
What if Adam Carriker starts banging the drums? Whoa,
hey,
can we get into it then?
Yeah.
So you and I talked about the coordinators during the break. It helps a lot that we have Dana Holgorsen and Mike Eckler. I'm not throwing any shade on John Butler. I just don't know as much about him as the coordinator. His 1 year of experience at Penn State as a D coordinator. His resume speaks for itself. I can't wait to see what happens with the defense this fall. You talked about Rutgers and Boston College. You know what I immediately thought of when you pointed those out as one-score games that shouldn't have been one-score games? 2 blocked punts versus Rutgers, 2 blocked kicks versus Boston College. You take those 4 blocked punts and kicks away, those aren't one-score games. That's the Mike Eckler effect. That's the Mike Eckler difference. I feel a lot better about one-score games, with all due respect to Matt Rhule, because of Mike Eckler, because of Dana Holgorsen, and frankly, because our defense has been the most steady side of the ball we've had for the past 2 years. I'm not declaring us unbeatable in one-score games all of a sudden, to be clear. I'm just saying I feel a lot better. 17-46 since the 2014 Holiday Bowl versus USC. If we're going to win 8 or 9 games this year, we have to have a winning record in one-score games. I've said we're going to win 8 games at least. I'm on the record as that. So I'm going to predict we're going to have a winning record of one-score games, Jake.
I'll definitely take it. I love it. I do have. So we were talking about the coordinators.
Yeah.
And so I did look back at Temple and Baylor. There was continuity, and that was year 3 for the coordinators as well as year 3 for Matt Rhule. That's going to be a difference for this year, because I know we're looking at similarities and differences. The difference that I see that Nebraska's not going to probably get, unless it takes a meteoric rise from somebody on that defensive side of the ball, is a stalwart defender. Both those Temple and Baylor had stalwart defenders. Tyler Matasevich won the Benerick Award and the Nagurski Award for Temple. My goodness, they also had a Son Reddick. I mean, they had a good defense. And then maybe lesser known, but James Lynch did win Defensive Player of the Year in the Big 12 in year 3 under Matt Rhule as well for Baylor. So it's kind of interesting, because those teams, the Matt Rhule teams have been like heavily, this is an offensive team or this is a defensive team. There are definitely, well, we've seen it in Nebraska that can be the case. So it kind of sways here and there. But that's what I see that I just don't know if Nebraska can make up, because I don't even know who I'd throw out there as somebody to that level.
I'm going to come back to that, because I wrote 6 names down here, and I'm not limited to the 6 while you were talking, potential all-conference players. But when you look on the defensive side of the ball, you've got Phil Snow. There's some continuity there with Snow and Rhule, and obviously Butler was on staff last year. I think with offense, Rhule just says, Holgorsen, it's yours. So I'm not saying there's not continuity. I'm saying there may not need to be as much continuity if you just hand it over to freaking Dana Holgorsen and hand the special teams over to Mike Eckler. I have a feeling Snow and Rhule may be a little bit more hands-on with the defense, because I know Rhule's more of a defensive guy. Phil Snow, we know, is more of a defensive guy. It may just be the natural tendency. That's not an indictment on anyone on defense. And I think they're going to be more on the same page than they were a year ago within that defensive coach's meeting room. So I just wanted to put that out there. But as far as potential all-conference players or award winners, Marquez, Watson, Trent. Again, in the entire country, all the linebackers returning in all of America in college football, he was the number 2 graded linebacker in the country. This is a potential all-conference player. That's regardless of conference. Dawson McCullough has first-round talent. What comes of it? He's not the only one on defense, okay? You look at Dylan Raiola. You look at Emmett Johnson. You look at Elijah Pritchett, who was projected by some to be a first-round pick. You look at Dane Key, who could have been a second or third-round draft pick this year going into the NFL. Am I saying all these guys are all-conference performers? I don't know. They all, plus other guys on the roster. You can look at Hunter. You can look at other guys as well. Rocco Spindler as a guard. I mean, they've talked about our center coming up this year. Should be winning the Remington is what they've said. Okay, so we'll see what happens. There is potential for guys to be that good. We've seen that in the past. What does happen? What does actually happen? So my final thought on what we can learn from year 2 to year 3 from Baylor, Temple, and what we might be able to project here at Nebraska is there is a lot of similarities. The differences are we're counting on new transfers the same way he counted on returning players. To me, there's a little bit more of a question mark there because the player is good or they wouldn't have brought him in. How's it all gel though? And we're counting on, I don't want to say like star-studded coordinators, but it's like a star-studded coordinator room. And whether there's the cohesiveness or not, again, I'm not saying there's not, there may not need to be because you just kind of trust Eckler with special teams and Holgorsen with offense. And I'm not saying you can't do that with Butler in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there may not need to be the cohesiveness, whether there is or not, because you trust them because they've got the proven track record already before you brought them in. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I do. I'm glad that you highlighted Marquise Watson Trent because I do think that's a guy that I know his size isn't the most impressive, but was the player of the year from his own conference. So maybe he could be the ringleader on defense that gets it going.
Dude, I played next to London Fletcher. Like, yeah, size matters. London legit, his head came up to like my shoulders. That's not a joke or an insult or anything. It's the truth. My locker was right next to his and Robert's, RG3s. We were all 3 right next to each other. And he started more consecutive NFL football games in the history of the NFL than anybody that wasn't a kicker. This includes Brett Favre at quarterback. This includes wide receivers, and he's a middle linebacker, and he was undersized, and he's one of the greatest to ever do it. And compare his stats to Ray Lewis. His are slightly better. He just wasn't as vocal. And that's not a good or a bad thing, but that's the only reason he's not as well known. And he was undersized, so to speak.